Hi you! In this video I will compare the Canyon Stoic with the Trek Roscoe in another Burly hardtail battle. I previously did a video where I compared the specialized views with the Trek Roscoe, but now when I reviewed the Canyon Stoic, I feel these two bikes are much more interesting to compare, since they are even closer to each other. Word of warning, I will nerd down on details in this video, and that includes key features, what they like to ride, specs for each version, geometry to the very detail, and finally I will give you my thoughts on which bike you should consider. It's funny, because every time I do an overlay over two bikes, they all look very similar to me, and this overlay is no exception. Based on this image alone, you don't see two entirely different bikes, do you? The Stoic might be a bit longer. The similarities don't end there. Both bikes are 29ers. They are slack, bordering enduro hardtails, with wide handlebars and short stems. The travel is 140mm and they have fairly short chainstays too. A clear indication that these bikes are not meant for cross-country races, but more for rowdy sessions in impossible terrain or in jump lines. What sets the Stoic apart from the Roscoe is, well, nothing really. But I do think that the Stoic is the wallet-friendly underdog here, and that the Fuse is the more refined bike. We need to dive into the geometry chart to find out more. There are so many similarities in this chart. The head angle and C-tube angle are almost identical. The chainstays and the cockpit is a very close match too. The most noticeable difference though is the reach, which is 10mm shorter on the Roscoe. This is something that confused me a bit, and to this day I don't fully understand why Trek would go for a shorter reach on this type of bike. I'm guessing that Trek wanted to make a playful bike, which it certainly is, but I felt somewhat cramped in this size, and my 185cm would probably be more comfortable on a size extra large Roscoe, which is 495mm in reach. The Stoic fits me better in size large, and the bike feels very familiar to the Canyon Spectral 125, even though the Spectral is an entirely different bike. The stack height is somewhat low on the Stoic though, and from my understanding it's not uncommon that Stoic owners replace the stock handlebar with something that's got even more rise. That all depends on how you intend to use the bike. With the original specs, this bike is very balanced with an appropriate amount of tire pressure both front and rear. From my review of the Stoic, that was my big takeaway. It's a very balanced bike, which I found was one of the easiest bikes to jump with that I've ever tested. I'm an average mountain biker and I truly appreciate all the help I can get. And finding a bike that feels balanced is important to me. The Roscoe can also jump, but again size large felt a tad too small for me. I am in between sizes here. Another detail is a slightly higher bottom bracket on the Roscoe, which further sends me forward over the handlebar on this bike. That must be put in relation to the Roscoe's tall stack height that makes the bike less scary in the descents. But the taller stack height is yet another factor that can make a bike feel somewhat cramped. If you are interested in getting the Roscoe, you really should consider getting a larger size than you might think you need. I favor the Stoic so far, but that's mainly down to the sizing of the two bikes that I've tested. When the head angle slackens and the C-tube angle steepens, it will affect the amount of reach you will feel comfortable with. You will need a longer bike. Before we dive into the specs, there are a few other differences that I want to point out first. The Roscoe runs on 2.6-inch wide tires, and the Schwalbe tires on the Stoic are 2.35 inches. When I tested the Roscoe, I felt that it made sense to have a bit more volume in the tires on a hardtail to cushion that rear end somewhat. At the same time, there are benefits with thinner tires too. Anyway, there is enough clearance for 2.6-inch tires on the Stoic too, should you prefer to. Another thing that I want to point out is the paint job. I'm so disappointed in how sensitive the paint is on many bikes. The slightest touch turns into a scratch straight away. The clear winner here is the Roscoe, which has got a more durable paint that also looks rather premium. The Stoic scratches easily, and on top of that there is no chainstay or down tube protection to speak of. To make things even worse, the clutch on the NX drivetrain is not very strong, so you really need to protect your chainstay a bit extra because of that. When it comes to droppers, the Stoic takes the win with the modern 170mm dropper in this size. The 150mm dropper on the Roscoe is not quite enough. Maybe the mounts for an extra bottle holder are in the way for longer droppers. I'll leave that unsaid. It's time to compare the specs and see what we get for our money. Different markets get different specs, so take this comparison for what it is. There is also a Roscoe 6 in the Trek lineup, but that's an older model, so we will skip that bike in this chart. Starting from the base model, the Stoic 2 is fantastic value for money. I don't know if it's because of Black Friday at the time of making this video, but it's very difficult, if not impossible, to find a modern hardtail of this quality for 800 euros. Okay, the Sun 2 fork is not very sensitive, but it is an air fork that does the job. The brakes are the most basic trail brakes from Shimano, albeit reliable, and the Shimano drivetrain is only 10 speed compared to the Roscoe's 12 speed. That doesn't really bother me, to be honest. I often think that 12 speeds are too much to keep track of anyway. The only negative I have to say about the Stoic 2 is that it doesn't come with a dropper. Add another 150 euros and get a brand X dropper or similar. They are just as good as more expensive droppers. Trust me on that. The Roscoe 7 is 1000 euros more expensive here, and that price difference is definitely not explained by the components. Even the tires on the Stoic 2 mops the floor with the Bontrager XR4s fitted to the Roscoes. The XR4s are faster rolling though. Stepping up a level, the Roscoe 8 offers not only 4-pot brakes, but also something very sweet which may make you reconsider the seemingly more refined Roscoe. I don't have a whole lot of experience from the RockShox 35 fork, but the drivetrain is decent enough. The Stoic 3 is a weirdly spec'd version that doesn't make anyone happy. I honestly doubt that any of the components listed here are better than the ones on the Stoic 2. It's got a dropper though. At the top tier, things get interesting. These are the bikes that I have tested. Overall, the specs on the Roscoe 9 is a clear step above the Stoic 4. You could argue that the Fox fork is similar to the RockShox Pike. To be honest, I didn't notice any difference between the two worth mentioning. Maybe you're a little bit cooler among your friends when you can say that you ride a Fox 36. The brakes and the drivetrain are more desirable on the Roscoe 9, but all of that comes at a cost. Again, it's a 1000 euro price difference between the two top tier bikes. And the question is if that 1000 euros will make you a happier rider. But it's not only the components that differ here. The overall build quality is also better on the Roscoe, and it's got a full internal cable routing if these things are important to you. The prices for the Trek bikes are the recommended prices, and things have changed in the world since the launch of the Roscoe. These are the prices that I found here in Sweden, and suddenly the Roscoe is better value for money. The weight of the top versions differ somewhat. I weighed the Stoic 4 myself, without pedals and with tubes, but got the Roscoe numbers from their website. The Roscoe comes with tubeless tires straight from the factory. There are a few reasons why the Stoic 4 is heavier. The excellent Schwalbe tires are very heavy compared to the Bontrager XR4s, and the SRAM SX cassette can well be changed for something else when it's worn. Which bike should you consider then? Personally, I think Hardtail should be about affordability and simplicity. And if you're just getting into the sport, it's hard to beat the Stoic 2. It's just so much bike for the money, and the components are decent enough. Since you nowadays can find Roscoes at a discount, I've changed my mind about the best valued Roscoe, from the Roscoe 7 to the Roscoe 8. A few hundred euros extra will give you a fork that does not flex as much, and one-finger brakes, along with that sweet hub. At the very top end, the Roscoe 9 is a better spec bike, but I'm a cheap Swede and I would settle for the Stoic 4. It's good enough for my type of riding and the bike fits my size better. Or maybe